on
my fault,
Thursdays.
folks.
No,
All my
no,
fault.
that's okay. The check's in the mail. So you've got a new column up, Mike, that's very topical,
Thank you.
feudalism. And you're looking at the phenomena of several laws that only apply to the rest of us lumpen proletariats, while the petty bourgeois establishment, liberal, elitist, illuminated world order types, they get a pass. And you start with mentioning Justin Trudeau, who was clearly acting like a dictator when he tried to stop the truckers' strike by doing all kinds of stuff, including removing their bank accounts and
Yeah.
real strong arm kind of stuff that you wouldn't expect coming out of Canada. And it's been adjudicated, and he's now been seen as in the wrong, but nothing is going to happen.
Well, that's right. I mean, I put in the piece, of course, I've always hated Justin Trudeau. And again, it's the old second generation thing. I wasn't a real fan of his father either, but
Right.
that's another story. So, uh, yeah, he gets the equivalent of a strongly worded letter, right? After the fact, I mean, it's ridiculous, right? Naughty boy, you shouldn't have done this. Nothing's going to happen to the guy.
No.
Uh,
And then here domestically, we just have the news come in that Peter Navarro, domestic advisor to President Trump, has been sentenced to 4 months in prison, and for not appearing before the Liz Cheney J6 phony committee. Meanwhile, the Liz Cheney committee had apparently deleted hundreds of emails and other relevant things when they on their way out, and as the House went to the Republicans, which I mean, it's certainly constitutionally questionable. Let up, I don't know if it's illegal, but apparently they did this in terms of anything that might have exonerated President Trump. And you've got Hunter Biden basically doing the same thing that Navarro did, except in his case, he wasn't asking or expecting executive immunity. He just skipped out on a congressional hearing. And we could look up the recent history of that. You've got Eric Holder during the Obama years refusing to testify, and etc. And yet, for
Nothing happened to him
Navarro,
at all, by the way.
no, Navarro, they're throwing the book at him.
Yeah.
And I would
So,
imagine that Steve Bannon will be next.
yeah, well, I mean, it's sort of a riff on the old cliche, the famous Stalin statement when Pope Pius XII condemned whatever Stalin was doing, and there was plenty of it to condemn. He just turned around and said, "How many divisions does the Pope have?"
Mm.
So
Yeah.
I think that, and I'm not saying this in retrospect, I think Navarro made a mistake because even though he was technically in the right of having this executive privilege, he had to know how corrupt the government is, how terrible the judicial system is, how corrupt Congress is. He just should have gone there, stonewalled it, or made some stupid answers, and that would have been it.
Right,
I
right. He could have.
hate to see the guy fall on his sword for something this stupid.
Yeah, it could be, but we have a phenomena right now in this country where one doesn't expect to have to go to prison for
Oh
that,
no.
and yet it seems to be what's coming down the pike, and I just think it's going to be. And we talked about this earlier this year, that given President Trump's advent as the nominee, it's going to get worse, and it's going to get more dangerous and uglier and meaner, and I don't know what they're going to pull out next, but there's going to be a lot of nasty stuff going down to stop
The
Trump.
encouraging sign is that the states are starting to fight back. I mean, ironically, at the time I wrote my article, there were 6 states that had
Hmm.
lined up with Texas. Now there's 14, and that must have happened like minutes after I posted the article. So
Wow.
uh,
I wonder if
clearly,
my own beloved home state of Massachusetts will be joining that one. I don't think so.
well, here's the thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, listeners or Chuck, this is pretty uh, clearly stated in Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, right, that the government is supposed to protect against the states being invaded.
Yeah, exactly.
So you would expect by now the liberals, um, unfortunately, most of whom are just flat stupid, including the latest one they brought in, who not only didn't know what a woman was, she was unaware of the case of U.S. versus Virginia, which was a landmark case by any definition, because that was against VMI, Virginia Military Institute, and
Hmm.
that was the last holdout of having all male enrollment at the school. So, how in the world can you be a Supreme Court justice and not know that? She's a moron, all
Right.
right?
Yeah, you're
And
right.
she was designated to be in there uh, because of her race and her gender. Although it's kind of ironic in the case of her gender, she doesn't know what a woman is anyway.
Mm. No,
So,
it's aggravating.
by the same token, I think Navarro should have put his finger in the wind, seeing that he's not going to get any relief on this. Um, Roberts, I'm not surprised. Amy Barrett, as I point out in my article, there had to be a lot of peer pressure on her. And I think, let's just state the facts here. She's just a kiss ass. All
Mm.
right. Obviously, she was subject. I mean, none of the liberals have the intellectual wherewithal to discuss anything with her. So it had to be Roberts who pressured her into this. And she's going to regret this for the rest of her life. This was such a chicken type of decision. How the hell does someone live with themselves?
I mean, look, we don't even need to ask the obvious question here either, which is, how do the liberals think that they can do this? I mean, I don't know. And Kagan seems to have half a brain. I mean, what the hell? Is it really this that they really don't think that they really have support open borders? First of all, the state of Texas has actually apparently been regulating immigration of that border since Texas was an independent republic in
Right.
the 1840s. So it's kind of married in over there that they've always had their own immigration policy. It's nothing new. But, as you say, it's the plain language of the Constitution.
Well, that's why I'm not even focused on Roberts because he's some gelded
I
individual.
know what's going on. I mean, I get the sense that we're getting somebody coming in through. Yes, hello. How are you? You're on the air. Uh oh. I don't like the way this sounds. I'm getting rid of it. Yeah. See, you never know with TikTok. Cancel. Yeah.
It could have been John Roberts.
uh, I don't trust TikTok. You never know who's going to come in over there. It's a pretty strange group. Um,
Wow.
but Roberts, look, there's always been rumors about him being blackmailed, and a lot of these people, there's a lot being said about this. Former Congressman Cawthorn. Now uh, you've got James O'Keefe has an inside video showing this congressional aide talking about congressmen being blackmailed and going to orgies and all
Yeah.
kinds of crap. I don't know what his deal is, but this
Well, supposedly the story on Roberts was
the what?
the story on Robert supposedly was that he adopted two kids,
Right.
and a lot of strings were pulled. Let me put it that way. A lot of strings were pulled that he was able to get uh, two white kids, contrary to the apparently immigration policies of both Ireland and some country in South America.
Hmm.
But the joke with this is that how can you blackmail somebody with a fact that's seemingly known by everyone because this was on the internet like mad. All right. But I think the other problem with Roberts is that when he was put in, he reminded me of people in corporate America that I hated that their entire life was figuring out how to polish their resume. And he
Yeah.
strikes me as that kind of guy.
He does, and of course, I don't think I'm speaking out of school here when I say that there have been pictures emerging that where there's this man who has an awfully striking resemblance to Roberts over on that certain island
Yeah, yeah.
in the Caribbean. You know what I'm talking about. I don't
Oh,
really
yeah.
want to. Yeah, I mean, we don't want to get too explicit, but the whole purpose of that was blackmail, and according to Madison Cawthorn and according to this whistleblower over with O'Keefe, half of them are being blackmailed on something, and that's a policy that goes way back.
Well, it
Um,
is interesting. I mean, I had certainly seen that from many sources. But here's the problem. Why are there so many people of such low moral character that would be able to be blackmailed? I'm sure most of your listeners and you and most people do not have some horrible sin that they committed that they could be blackmailed about.
right? No, you're right. I mean, they get corrupted right away when they go to Washington.
Yeah,
It's like you get swept up in it, and you get into the party scene, and before you know it, you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing, and it's on film.
yeah.
I mean, it's and yeah, these are not people of great moral probity. They don't have
So,
any.
you're right. But in the case of Amy Barrett,
Yes.
the good Catholic girl that adopts all these kids and whatnot,
Yeah. What's
I
the
think it
deal
was
with that?
peer pressure.
Yeah. I mean, they. I read that Nixon, when he appointed Blackmun, who basically wrote the Roe versus Wade decision,
Right.
he had him over his house the day before the announcement just to meet with him and kind of interview him. And he said to Blackman, he goes, you're going to be, you and your wife and your family are going to be under enormous social pressure by the Washington establishment, the party going elites, people, the in crowd, to kind of get invited to these things. How are you going to feel? How's your wife going to feel when when you're confronting a tough case and you might have to make a decision that runs contrary to what they want? Are you going to stand up or are you going to capitulate? And Blackman says, "Oh no, I'm going to be independent, and I'm going to." But of course, he did capitulate to that. His wife wanted to go to the fancy parties. It's a culture that people
Yeah.
get swept up in, and they don't have enough internal strength to resist that. They don't realize. I mean, you go to Washington and screw those parties. You don't go to any of them ever. You just do your job. I remember the late Jerry Williams, who I consider to be a mentor as a radio talk show host. He was a great talk show host. He could get on the air and talk for 4 hours without a guest. And he was brilliant. Just take call after call. But he said, look, politicians in Boston at that time, because he was Massachusetts, these are very dynamic people. They're very interesting people. They're very, seductive type people. They're con men. I mean, they know how to bring you in. You don't associate with them. You don't hang out with them. You don't see them other than to do an interview, because if you do, you're going to get sucked into it. And that's what you have to do. You have to have that kind of strength to say, I'm not going to be your friend. I'm not going to get involved. I'm here to do a job, and I'm going to keep myself separate. And yet, you don't have anybody like that today. And he took on some tough issues. He peed off, a lot of people were pissed off at Jerry
How
because he
long was he
kept.
on the air?
Oh, he was on the air for I mean, at least 20 years.
Wow. Okay.
And he was just a great guy, and they did him in at the end. I mean, it's a kind of a sad story. But he can go to the great beyond, knowing that he had been a man of integrity. He didn't get sucked into this kind of corrupt culture that exists in Massachusetts and probably everywhere else. He kept his independence, and he would kick ass. I mean, he'd get on the air and he would really, like, he didn't care. He didn't care what anybody thought of him. He wasn't
I,
asking himself, how am I going to be, seen by the Boston Globe, or how, you know what I mean? He didn't worry about it. He knew that they hated him, and he just went ahead and he plowed forward. I think that Jeff Cooner is sort of his successor, and he's like that too. He's very tough, keeps himself very independent, and they hate him in Boston. They want to get him out. I'm shocked that he's still there. He has a huge show. But you have to have some people like that, and they're very rare. There's not too many people who do this now, who are willing to just say, hey, they understand what their job is and they do it. Either that or they're completely corrupt, like Bill Barr. Oh my God. Talk about a crook. What a rotten figure he is. I mean, I'm listening to Rudolph Giuliani is another one. Boy, you have to check out his show. He's amazing. He goes live on Twitter. He doesn't care. They've ruined his life. They've sent him into bankruptcy. They've thrown everything they can at him, and yet he's still there telling the truth. And he's been, as they say in our business, he's been red pilled. He's like aware of what's going on. And he points out that Bill Barr knew damn well that the election was stolen. He refused to hear the evidence. He lied to Trump when he said that he'd investigated it, when he didn't. And he was screaming at people who were bringing things up to him, like the post office guy who's been exonerated, who said, I delivered these pallets of ballots from New York to Pennsylvania. Barr was yelling at them. I don't want to hear this. And he was one of the masterminds of the whole rotten thing. Now I know here I'm on TikTok. I'm probably going to lose the show for that. Any second they're going to shut me down. So be it. I don't care. I'm not going to censor myself on TikTok. TikTok can screw themselves. I'm not going to worry about it. That's what happened. But I don't know. I mean, I feel a little hopeful with President Trump.
yeah.
I mean, it was kind of interesting to see how the media handled that victory. I mean, it's in New Hampshire. I went up there. I got to see a little of it firsthand. I didn't see anything that interesting, but I did see the Trump crowd gather.
Did you follow the Haley group at all?
No, I mean, they were nowhere to be seen. I mean, I spent most of my time in Manchester
Okay.
and just watching the media, and it was very, very heavy. I mean, they were, they just they didn't know what to do. But the Trump followers are there. They're dynamic. The only office that actually had any slickness to it was Dean Phillips, who was running as a Democrat against against Biden, and he was interviewed today where he said, "Hey, you know something? My party just doesn't get it because I went to one of the Trump rallies. Obviously, I'm not a supporter of Trump, but I found people to be polite and gracious and very diverse," he said, "and very, serious people. And it's not what I'm always told what it is. The way the media demonizes, us as some kind of like a, buck-toothed guy with coveralls and a long stringy beard. It's like the way they portray it. And he was shocked to find out that these are all good people that really were very, involved and were standing up there in the freezing weather for hours waiting to get into that rally. So that fills me with hope. I think that Trump is, assuming that we don't see the Kennedy solution, God forbid, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I think that he's going all the way. I mean, it's another little wrinkle that came out, which the media refused to mention, is that 60% of people polled said that they believed that the election was not legitimate and that Biden was not legitimate.
Yes.
And that was both in Iowa and New Hampshire. They're attacking New Hampshire now. Oh, it's all white and it's all like small and who cares? The media and the way they cover it, they're like they'll only talk about Nikki Haley, and she comes up first. That's the first story. Then they give a few seconds for Trump, and then they interview some schmuck. I don't know where they find him. Oh, well, I'm really disillusioned with the candidates, both of them. They're terrible. And, oh, I can never vote for Trump. they're interviewing people to find someone to go on the camera to say what they want. That's what they do. I can speak to that. That's what happened to me. They want to craft a story and they're going to go out and hunt down someone who's going to fit the bill in terms of saying what they want them to say.
Well,
And
meanwhile,
it's not working.
70% of Haley's voters were not registered Republicans.
Oh, I know. Oh, exactly. And that was open. And that skunk governor was literally openly calling for them to vote for Haley and switch parties, which they did. And that they still
But
didn't.
tell me, Chuck, because you've been following New Hampshire forever, right?
Yeah.
What is the point of doing that other than getting, false points added to your basketball score? Those people are never going to vote for a Republican. So what? This is some sort of gloss you're putting on your campaign, and you're not going to fool anybody. I mean, what
Are
is
you asking about Sununu, why he did it?
why this notion of pumping up her numbers by
Oh.
having Democrats cross over to vote in the primary?
Well, because there's a huge money pouring into her campaign. This guy who runs LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman, who
He shut
apparently,
off the money. He shut it off.
yeah, but he had already spent like a huge amount of money, and apparently
She spent 30 million in New Hampshire.
he's financing the lawsuit brought by that woman against Trump in New York, the Carol. He's and she lied about it before a judge, but he's like really hates Trump. He's just a Trump hater. He'll do anything to, he's one of these guys. I don't know what his deal is, but there was a huge amount of money pouring into her campaign, huge amount of media ads. Sununu, apparently, according to rumor, she promised he'd be the vice presidential nominee. And he's a longtime Trump hater anyway.
What is his deal? And again, here's my cliche: worse than the father. And the father was no problem.
No, he was no, nothing to scream about either. I don't know. They're little potentates, and they have their little fiefdom over there in New Hampshire. I don't know how to explain how they do it, but
Well,
state government can be very
let's invoke some history here. What is the position in this primary? What was the position of the fabled Manchester Union leader?
Oh, that's been gone for a long time. I mean, since Loeb died, that has gone to the dark side.
Really, it's gone full liberal now. Oh my
yeah,
word!
yeah, pretty much. Not totally, but yeah. I mean, it's not what it was. I mean, they used to be a tough. That used to be a tough outlet. A lot of money pouring in.
Yeah.
There's money talks, and what walks. I mean, it's just it was very corrupt, and she only reason why she did even somewhat well was because of all those crossover votes, and she's going to get her clock cleaned in Nevada and in her home state of South Carolina. So I think that Trump is going to have it in spite of this huge effort that's going on, unless they pull something out, and we don't know what that might be. I don't either that or
I
Trump
don't
does
think
something
there's
so
really
stupid.
anything more to pull out. This E. Jean Carroll thing was absurd.
Right.
It could only have worked in New York, where you have a bunch of liberal mouth breathers. I mean, imagine someone not knowing any details of how they were raped, looking like an imbecile on the stand, but yet the judge says it's substantially true. I mean, what was that? And it seems like every show I'm on successive weeks, I start hating the judiciary even more than I thought I did.
Yeah, but you know something? I think that first of all, that case is obviously a bad one, and she's lied constantly before the judge. And even though he's a partisan hack, I mean, I don't know how that's going to go. And even if Trump, it's ruled against Trump, everyone's seen that. And same thing with Letitia in New York. She's now up the ante. She wants to have Trump permanently banned for the rest of his life in terms of doing business in New York State. I mean, talk about just insane hatred and who knows what makes these people tick. But the one that worries me is Jack Smith. That one, he's not screwing around. Also, Fanny has imploded.
Well, she's got her own problem.
She got her own problems, and that whole thing was phony. Now in New York State, you have this voting machine expert Haldeman testify in a case that was originally brought by Stacey Abrams and that
Yeah.
finally has made it into court, and it's working against them because he took a pen from the prosecutor and he held up the Dominion voting machine and he manipulated it so that it changed votes right in front of the judge. And he showed, I just twisted this and I twisted that and I switched these votes from George Washington to Benedict Arnold. And he showed how it's done in a matter of minutes. Now, the judge is the sister of Amy Totenberg. That's not good. She's the one that ran the campaign against Clarence Thomas. She's the federal judge down there. So that's not good news. But it was seen on television. I mean, certainly the Gateway Pundit covered it, but it was seen in Georgia, and the Georgia media is covering it. And it just really doesn't look right. It's going to force that corrupt Secretary of State Raffensperger maybe to come in and have to testify. So far, he's been able to duck that. And that is going to undermine whatever's left of Fannie Willis's case, which is basically the Trump by asking Raffensperger to look into the vote that he had done something, he obstructed the election. That's obviously, I think it's going to be thrown out. So the only one left really is Jack Smith, and he's not screwing around. That one
But
scares me.
he's had some reversals too of
Yeah, but
late.
they got everything riding on that one, and and also that one is. I think that Tucker Carlson made the point that the reason why Trump has it in the bag now, the reason why the American people are going to reelect him, is it all happened the day the FBI went through his wife's underwear drawer.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what did it. That incident, the fact that they would show up with a SWAT team over a documents charge and rummage through his son's sports memorabilia, and his wife's. I mean, just it was so ugly, and that Giuliani added to this in his commentary by saying, "Look, if they had brought one case, maybe they could have sold it, maybe, but by bringing 4 or 5 cases and pacing them out, and now it's turned out, it's irrefutably proven that they all were coordinated from the White House.
Right.
That this is not only is it overkill and it has turned the American people have turned on them, but Giuliani argues that this is a violation of due process. You don't do that. You do one case at a time. I mean, if somebody was brought up as a mob figure, right? They could charge them with 5 or 6 different cases, but they don't. You do the one case, and then when that's over, you go to the next case. You don't file 5 cases against somebody all at once. I mean, it's a violation, as Giuliani said, of due process. Now, I don't know if that's a legal violation, but it certainly runs contrary to American jurisdictional traditions. We generally haven't done that in this country to people, including real criminals.
Yeah. Well, the saving grace here, as I've always put, is that ultimately they're all too stupid. Okay. I mean, think about this. If you had some giant conspiracy where you're going to get involved with prosecutors in Georgia and in New York State, maybe what you want to do is find someone who's actually competent and not corrupt. This Fannie Willis thing is a joke. She's
Yeah.
going to get creamed when this thing is
Oh yeah, and
heard.
they're going forward with an investigation. So that doesn't look great for them. There's a lot riding on that one. They spent a lot of ink on that, a lot
Yeah.
of time on the air. So I
And
think that yeah,
I was going to say, even the New York Times said that Nathan Wade, her boyfriend, should resign. Right? I mean, this is so corrupt. It is like dime store corruption,
yeah.
just unbelievable. And I suspect that there are many black residents of Atlanta that aren't too pleased with this sort of thing.
Right. No, in
Maybe
fact, I don't know if you saw well, it's on TikTok, but this young black man got up at the Fulton County hearing, and he completely creamed them over this. He says Fannie and the rest of these people, this is an outrageous use of our taxpayer money to fund this, and that you're going after the former president, and it's just he completely laid it out in a way that nobody else could. So yes, I think that black people in that region are not happy with this. I mean, don't forget the black citizens of Atlanta are, they're fairly upper class. This is not some, this isn't like, the lower, the South Bronx there. This is like people who are wealthy, people who have made it, they've integrated. And people like Stacey Abrams. And, they're not happy with this. This isn't them. This is embarrassing. So we'll
Well,
see.
they don't seem to have any class in how they do this sort of thing. So that is what I'm sort of hanging my hat on, is that no matter what they do, they can't get out of their own way. Now, kind of related to this, although it has nothing to do with Trump, it was brought out a couple of weeks ago that the CDC had drafted a memo. I think it was April 2021, for God's sake, warning about the dangers of myocarditis with the vaccine.
Oh
The memo was never released.
Who's behind not releasing that? That's criminal.
Well, it was Rochelle. And the reason was that they didn't want to panic people.
Oh my
So
God.
here is a healthcare agency that would rather people got myocarditis than panic them against the holy vaccines. And what's
That
even
is
worse,
so despicable. I mean, I can't believe how
okay,
how
but
evil that
there's
is.
things here's what's worse. All right, if you have brain one, you realize that these public health agencies aren't worth a part of the blow to hell at this point. All right. So imagine my surprise when I go on some of these websites that I, in a couple of cases, used to write for, and there are people still defending the vaccine, and as support, they say, "Well, Rochelle said so and so." It's a parody of itself.
Ugh, I mean, it's just it's really. I mean, I'm a little reluctant to this one. I will get kicked off of TikTok for to get into this subject. But let's just say that there's really something very rotten going on here, something very immoral, that they would be worried about the, the image of the, what,
Yeah.
and they would put, hundreds of thousands of lives at risk.
Well,
We don't know the long term, and we don't even know the long term effects. We could all be dead. We'll all be dead 10 years from now. I mean, I mean, who knows? I mean, I've heard stuff that indicates that people have changed as a result of it. Now, I don't really want to get into that. I'm not a doctor. I mean, I've had the vaccine, unfortunately. Nothing major that I've noticed, but I regret it deeply. And I think that there are people who, has it changed them? It's an mRNA transmission into the DNA, which alters the DNA possibly for good, and it affects the spike protein, which is a product of that. And these things are experimental. I mean, we don't know what the long-term effects of that is going to be. We won't know for another 5, 6, 7 years. We know immediately that there's been very bad effects. All of a sudden, the Boston Globe doing a story about this strange and inexplicable increase of cancers in young people.
Yeah.
Do they mention the V word? No.
No.
It's all like, maybe they're going to blame global warming.
I think the reasoning behind it was that, as I indicate in my latest article, I don't think people appreciate how close we were to absolute tyranny when these vaccine passports came out, which then would have gone to a social credit system, to digital currency, where you have your digital currency card, and we looked on your health record, you're too fat, so you can't buy these cookies. And
I mean, I got into this in my new book. Not to get into a shameless plug here, but The Anti-Semitic Imagination, now available on Amazon. I get into this in my chapter on Hitler and on the Holocaust. The reason why it's important for people today to understand the Holocaust isn't because it was the Jews, it's because you had an establishment with the connivance of the international establishment decide that they were going to target a particular group of people. In this case, it was the Jews. And the result is that they were able to hunt down as many Jewish men, women, and children as possible in occupied Europe and put them on trains and send them to the concentration camps. Whereas the rest of the world did nothing and knew about it. The elites of the rest of the world, not average people, but they basically shut the door to anybody getting out of it. And so they turned Europe into one gigantic prison camp. And it's relevant to understand because that could happen to any group of people that is likewise targeted by this international elite. And you bring up the point, Michael, quite accurately, that this could have and almost did happen with people in the early part of 2021 who refused to get the vax. I
Right.
remember the absolute vicious coordinated campaign. I mean, not that she was the only one, that Katie Couric, public spokesman, we have to put them in concentration camps, she says. Really? And she wasn't the only one. They're like, these people need to be, sent away. I mean, that they're evil, that they're the demonization. It had even the
Have
same
you
language
noticed?
the Nazis used.
Have you noticed? And I point this on the article. Have you noticed that not a single one of these bastards ever apologized?
Oh,
You don't see
no.
Katie Couric. So this is the easy test for, are these people pure evil? All right. If I make a mistake and I genuinely am sorry for what I did, I'm going to apologize for it. But if I make a quote mistake, which really ended up being trumpeting the party line, these people are awful. Not a single one of them has
No.
ever apologized for taking that point of view. And indeed, it goes on. When the NFL
Mm,
is running this thing with Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift, both being these shameless promoters of the vaccine, I can
right.
tell you this. Yeah, there's a commercial of him getting the vax live. You can bet your life that was a placebo.
Oh, I don't doubt it. I mean, there's probably a lot of saline going around.
Yeah.
Um, oh, I've got some people following me. It doesn't look like it.
What is this?
Uh-oh, we
What
get.
did I do?
I'm not going to accept any of this. Um,
What? Okay.
TikTok. I mean, I put it on. It's a strange thing. People will come on and they'll just start babbling. Um, but yes, I mean people, and they were talking about people being anti-science. Rachel Maddow got up on her show and she said, "The vaccine will completely give you 100% immunity forever." She says,
Did she apologize?
"Never." And she had no. Even the CDC didn't say that. I mean, there was no. There was nothing. I mean, it was just complete BS and utterly unscientific. And then, of course, you mentioned the vaccine passports. I know I've said it before. I'll say it again. They were really rolling out an electronic version of that from the World Economic Forum,
Oh,
by
you
which
bet.
every individual would have to carry this thing. And as you say, it could have information on it about every part of your life, including your political views. Maybe you might say, "Oh, you're too fat. You can't order that piece of cake." It's like whatever you do, you'd have to have the little barcode scanned, and they could find out everything. And that, yes, Alex Jones was absolutely right. Ultimately, they would have put it into your skin. It would have become a chip. So I totally think he's been vindicated on that score.
Well, isn't
And
it
the
interesting that the Book of Revelation talks about the mark of the beast,
yeah,
and this is, of course, worse than the mark of the beast because they didn't realize back then of the digital technology that you'd have this mark that could be read with a barcode scanner, so to speak. and you could have all this information. So why they are protecting this thing still is that that was the plan. Let's not forget that at the beginning of Nazi Germany, it was, quote, health issues
Mm.
that started this whole thing. It didn't start with the Jews, it started with the retarded people, and it started with disabled people.
Right.
And to their everlasting shame, the medical community in Germany was completely on board with this.
And the only reason that that didn't even continue in Nazi Germany was that it was so unpopular with
Yes.
the average German that, they didn't want to see their own family members get sent up the river because they were, they had maybe some mild condition. I mean, it didn't fly even with them. So you had a situation with the move toward electronic passports. They were implementing it. That was going to happen. And the people that stood up against it were none other than the Canadian truckers. They stopped it. We deserve an enormous a debt of gratitude to the Canadian truckers. They saved the friggin' world. They really did. They put a stop to commerce. The trucks, if the trucks don't move, they can bring a country to a complete halt within a matter of hours. I mean, you can't function in this world without the trucks. And they not only did they do that, but it was spreading. It was spreading to the United States, Australia, New Zealand, France, even Israel. You already had moves in this direction. And it put a stop to their plan, at least for now. That's why Trudeau flipped out like that and he was going to have them all rounded up. But it didn't work. They were successful, and as a result, the passports were withdrawn. Now, let's not forget that the passport agenda happened in, I think it was May or June of 2001. The pandemic, so called, was over at that point. There was no longer any question of a public policy issue, not that there ever was. But at that point, it was over, and yet they were rolling it out. Here in Boston, the newly elected mayor, Michelle Wu, she said that you had to show your passport to go into a restaurant or a store in the city of Boston. And she got resistance from local, even like Cambridge, which is an ultra liberal. They didn't play ball with that. They're like, no, not in Cambridge. So she had to back down. But the point is that they were, it coincided with the truckers. If the
Yeah.
truckers hadn't stood up like that, who knows where we would be right now. And I think that we should all be very concerned that they're going to do it again. I don't know if it's going to be with another bug or another sort of emergency, maybe a nuclear bomb going off in a major city. I don't know. There's a lot of instability right now in the world, and who knows what might happen. I mean, it's just this isn't going away. These people
Well,
don't
the
just throw in the
factor that
towel.
stopped the vaccine passports was so-called voluntary compliance at the checkout counter, if you will. All
Yeah,
right. In other words, if you had a restaurant, you were supposed to be the agent of the state
exactly.
checking the passport. Okay, here's the thing. In most states that charge sales tax, you're not getting a penny for doing the state the favor of collecting that sales tax and paying it to them. It just became a civic duty, whatever, and it's sort of trivial.
Right.
But if you got to the point where you're trying to bar someone from coming into a restaurant, they didn't want to play that.
No, no, no.
So,
They were turning everybody into like a Gestapo agent. I mean, it was
right,
crazy. Nobody played, and nobody in Boston played ball. Everyone ignored it.
yeah.
It was just, it didn't go, it didn't fly. It was a major embarrassment for Michelle Wu. I mean, she quietly repealed it like about a month later. But it would have been feasible had the truckers not stood up, though. I don't know how, but and maybe she goes a little too far. Who knows what she's all about? But generally speaking, they were rolling that thing out, and they were rolling it out big time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And people,
So,
as I stated in my piece, people don't realize how close we were to becoming a full-on dictatorship at that
oh
point.
yeah, no question. And I do correlate that with the way the Jews were treated by the Nazis. And again, I mentioned it, and I do in my book by noting that it's not really a matter of whether you care about the Jews or it's not. It's something the world needs to understand. If you run afoul of the elite for whatever reason, they can do it, and they will if they can get away with it, just like they did try to get away with it with the Nazis against the Jews. They would never, it's the same pattern. They were demonized, they were attacked, they were then gradually eroded all their rights. They lost their property, they lost their state, they lost their citizenship. They couldn't associate with, it was illegal for a Jew to marry a non-Jew. I mean, there's all these, one by one, they put in all these rules, and it just softened up the public to the point where they were then able to pull this thing off. And I mean, this could happen to any group.
Well, I thought it was very interesting that in the wake of this reaction against the feds on this Texas razor wire business, people like Beto O'Rourke, who I refer to as the soy boy in my piece, have come out and said that Biden should federalize the National Guard in Texas, much like Eisenhower in 1957 federalized the National Guard in Arkansas. However, and here again, the fatal flaw, Beto is too stupid to have realized that, first of all, Faubus was a Democrat, big time segregationist.
More than that, he was a socialist, self-described. Did you know
Yes.
that? Yeah.
And if there was any president who was balls out on illegal immigrants, it was Eisenhower.
Operation Wetback.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and
So,
also, I mean, he wants to federalize the government so that they can keep the border open,
yes.
so that they can stop any barriers on the border. I mean, how do they rationalize that? Is that supposed to be some kind of a virtue? Is that really what the left is saying?
The
Like, and
virtue is,
especially somebody from Texas. What is he out of his mind?
no, the virtue is this, that it becomes an exercise in raw power. As I've stated before, the problem the Democrats have is they're losing the muse, so to speak. Anyone who's actually an American is not sympathetic to their big plan. So they have to keep importing new voters.
Right. I know it's
And
pretty
that's the
blatant.
only way it's going to work, because it was suggested as long as 20 years ago that if the Democrats lose the black vote, it's game over. They might as well shut down the party.
And they are losing the black vote.
Yeah. So they're losing the black vote, Hispanic vote. How many
So they need fresh voters. Yeah.
So the idea is to have a continuous flow of a permanent underclass that I promise free stuff to. So it's kind of a latter-day Tammany Hall. You play ball with us, and we'll make your life a whole lot easier. And as I'm fond of saying, the only good thing Franklin Roosevelt did in his entire career was break Tammany Hall. And no one seems to remember him for that except me. But they're importing more potential Democratic voters. But I feel that is probably going to explode, because not every illegal immigrant is an idiot.
Right.
Much to their chagrin. All right.
No, a lot of them might be. Oops, I'm getting a violation warning already on TikTok. Yeah. Okay.
What did you violate?
It doesn't say. It's just a warning. I'm going to cancel out of TikTok because otherwise I might. Yeah.
They're watching you that closely?
Somebody, it's either a bot or it's somebody who is, and they've reported me. I mean, who knows? but I just crossed out of it. I just don't want to, see if I can maybe save it for another time. Who knows? I don't know.
This is interesting because the biggest problem that the World Economic Forum seems to have now is misinformation and disinformation, which is
Right.
broadly defined as anything that we disagree with is disinformation. Okay.
Oh yeah. I mean, this is obviously it's and they've got these huge disinformation mills now at the elite colleges like the Shorenstein Center over here at Harvard, who are trying to figure out ways to censor anything that they call quote disinformation unquote or
Well, what's the
misinformation.
definition of disinformation other
Anything they
than
don't like,
something that just
anything that
liberal?
doesn't genuflect to the left is
Yeah.
disinformation. That's quite clear. I mean, was it disinformation? This stupid conspiracy theory that Putin conspired with Trump to steal the 2016 election? And that one went on for about 3 years. Was it disinformation that the Ruskies planted the Hunter Biden laptop, right, to stop Trump in 2020? That one went on for about a year until the New York Times admitted that that was untrue. Was it disinformation that somehow Trump conspired to overthrow the government by sending the guy with the Viking hat into the U.S. House? That's an insurrection. The only reason they use the word insurrection is because the next day the media coined that word. It
Right.
was just completely made up. That's not disinformation. I mean, so fine. They do, it does show who controls the high ground of media. Now, if you listen to my guest earlier today, Dustin Nemos, he'll tell you it's the Jews who control everything and that the Jews are killing babies. But I argue that none of that's true. That's kind of the shiny object. The truth is that there's an elite of the world that is seeking to consolidate this control. It has nothing to do with Jews. I mean, although Jews are involved in it, but they're kind of like junior players in this thing. I mean, it's a much broader and much more secretive conspiracy.
Well, do you find it interesting that no details were ever given? Right? Putin conspired with Trump to fake the election, and no one asked the follow-up question. Well, okay, what did he actually do?
I
The
had
media,
somebody recently, I mean, because I challenged Mark Elias on this on Twitter, because he was one of the architects, and I had somebody take me on, and they're like, "Well, didn't you read the Mueller report? That had all kinds of evidence." Look, I haven't read every page of the Mueller report, but what I do know from it, and from listening to its analysis from Alan Dershowitz and a few other people, is that the first page of the Mueller report is the one I did read, and that said Trump was not guilty of this so-called collusion. They found
right?
no sufficient evidence to back that up. The rest of it is all about claiming or implying. It doesn't come out and say. It implies that Trump obstructed justice by criticizing Mueller and his committee. That's obstruction of justice. That's
Yeah.
the gist of it. So, and he never got back to me. In fact, he blocked me after I
Oh
pointed this out.
dear.
This is, he challenged me. I answered him. And he didn't like my answer, so he blocked me. I've
Well,
had that
you
happen.
can tell someone's a phony when they refer you to some work rather than just answering the question.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah.
this happened to me a long time ago. And Dennis Prager was at the same health club that I belonged to back then.
Right.
And I had read one of his columns. And I went up to him and said, what about so-and-so? Well, you'll have to read my book.
Oh man. Yeah, it's kind of an easy dodge.
Yeah, the paragon of moral virtue has been married 3 times. Thank you very much. Yes. But he does fool a lot of people.
And he had
And
some dust up recently with I think it was Charlie Kirk or somebody where he said that pornography is okay. I mean, this is supposed to be this great religious guy. I don't know.
no, the other thing is, as you will find with many of these self-professed experts, they don't really know anything. When was doing a critique of a movie called Noah that came out some years ago.
Yes, I know
His
that movie with
knowledge of the biblical version of Noah was a joke.
yeah.
Uh,
Do you
First
know
of
that
all,
movie actually? If you that the one with Russell Crowe, right?
yeah,
It actually the introduction, the beginning of that movie is really an extraordinary piece of work.
yeah,
I mean, I don't know how they got that through Hollywood, but it's actually pretty good. I mean, it shows creation. It's obviously a an abstract version of it, but it's pretty compelling. I mean, it really does a very good kind of rendition. And I thought that, I mean, obviously this is a Hollywood story, but it actually brought up. I think they had a couple of genuine biblical scholars involved with that
yeah.
and consulting with that. Same thing with Prince of Egypt. And my daughter loves that movie. It's actually pretty good in its portrayal of Moses and the whole saga. I mean, so there are a couple of times when something sneaks through.
Yeah, well,
And
it sneaked through, but when in Prager's critique,
yeah,
he made some comments that were just glaringly wrong. Uh, and believe me, the story of Noah in the Bible you could read in a few minutes. It's
right.
only a couple of chapters. So he is.
He's a
There are
phony.
so many of these people that are phonies, and they get away with it for so long. Uh, I'm spending too much time on Twitter or X now,
Right.
and there's a whole controversy. It doesn't matter who the guy is, who's someone who I pretty much respect. Jason Whitlock was
Oh yeah. Hmm.
going after some other people in the sports media, and so somebody posts this comment. Yeah, a real Christian calling people names. And I had to remind the guy, I said, well, if you had actually read the Gospels, you would see that Jesus spends at least one third of his time condemning people and calling them names.
Right. And
Yeah,
the Torah is filled with some pretty nasty stuff because that's what life is.
yeah,
You identify evil and you would display it. It's not some kind of a cheesy little, piece of fluff. That's why it's survived. There's something true about it. But he just had on E. Michael Jones, which I listened to. I thought he did a pretty
well,
good job.
but it was classic E. Michael Jones because he makes a lot of these good points, and then he always throws in the Jew.
But the Jews are responsible. I
Yeah,
know. It's just, and it really is it's in a way discrediting what we should be doing, which is
yeah,
actually analyzing the nature of this international trend. The sociologist Francis Fukuyama wrote a book which was very popular in the early tens, The End of History, where he makes the argument that since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States controls the world, basically, that we have hegemony. And but I don't know, I haven't read it, but the problem with that is that he's not delving into who controls the United States
yeah,
and what are the forces that are operating there. Is it the United States of the US Constitution? No. It's increasingly something else. And we all sense, especially as we move into the election, that the country has changed and that there's something rotten, as Shakespeare said, something rotten in Denmark, right?
yeah.
Anyway,
I mean,
Mike.
I have referred to the 1964 book, None Dare Call It Treason,
Yes,
a few
by
times.
Stormer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
excellent.
not only was it an unbelievable feat to self-publish a book and sell 7 million copies
Hmm.
when there's really no media like there is now, but there were so many truths in there about how things are getting undermined and destroyed and so on. But sadly, the left and a lot of people in the Republican Party chose to condemn it because it was attacking these august institutions. And that's
Right.
how
Well,
we point.
they refer to it as being anti-institution, and that's what they said about people who criticized the 2020 election. You're
Yeah.
against the democratic institutions. Quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. We want to make sure that we restore them and that they're honest,
Yeah.
that they're operating in their proper lane. You know, these institutions don't exist behind a glass in a museum. These are real, right? I mean, these are real things that function and that need to be constantly monitored and changed and reformed. I mean, so these are, made up of people who are, in many cases, corrupt and who are susceptible to ideas that might be corrupt and that are bad. So, to go after institutions for the sake of improving them by bringing them back to their original function, that's not anti institutional. That's not anti democratic. It's quite the opposite. I consider myself to be an institutionalist in that way. I want the institutions to operate in their own lane. I recognize we're going to have an elite establishment. That's life. I'm not against that either. I mean, that's just a reality. The question is, how is it monitored? How is it checked and balanced? The United States was supposed to have an elite that has a revolving door. People come and people go. We don't have an aristocracy. It was an informal, more informal system. I want to make sure that we preserve that and that we have it based on merit and based upon positive ideas and that we understand it and expose it. It doesn't become part of a secretive structure undergirded by secret societies.
Right.
Anyway, so Mike, you got a great piece up on your Substack,
Well, thank you.
Feudalism. Check it out. I put a link to it in the show, and
Thanks for that.
let's just pray for this country. Pray for this election, and that everything goes according to the way it is, because it's going to be a very bumpy road.
Well, and I'll just say it's really up to us because the facts now are that apparently the Supreme Court goes against the Constitution.
Yeah.
And Beto O'Rourke, believe me, is not the only Democrat that would like to ignite the Gestapo against his own state to open the floodgates. How we got to this point?
No, it's pretty weird. Anyways, Mike, I want to thank you as always.
All right,
Talk to you next week.
we'll do it again.
Thanks a lot.